Imagine this for a moment. You're walking through an endless desert, the kind where the horizon seems to melt into the sky, where silence presses against your ears until your own heartbeat sounds too loud. The air is dry enough to scrape your throat raw with every breath. The sun doesn't just shine, it burns, like a spotlight from the heavens that never turns off. And in this place, where no life should reasonably exist, you suddenly see something that doesn't belong. At first, it looks like a mirage. A dark shape against a backdrop of white sand dunes. You blink, rub your eyes, but it doesn't disappear. As you get closer, your stomach tightens, because it's not a mirage. It's a man. A man tied upright to a tree in the middle of the desert. His head slumps forward, arms stretched unnaturally around the trunk, ropes digging into his flesh. And the strangest part? He looks like he's been there for days, but there are no footprints, no tire tracks, nothing to explain how he got here. This is the kind of story that will crawl under your skin and stay there. If you're the kind of person who loves strange, dark, and mysterious true stories, the ones that make you pause, lean forward, and whisper, "Wait, what?" then you're in the right place. Always make sure to follow along, because every detail matters, and the deeper we go, the stranger this story becomes. The discovery happened in the late summer of 1998, in a barren stretch of desert that straddles the border between Nevada and Arizona. To the casual eye, it's a wasteland, sand, scrub brush, the occasional spiny cactus clawing toward the sky. But for those who know the land, it has a quiet beauty. Locals sometimes call it the Silent Sea, because when the wind dies down, the silence can be suffocating. It was in this silence that a group of amateur hikers stumbled upon something they'd never forget. Their plan that morning had been simple, a 3-day trek into the desert, to explore some old mining sites rumored to still contain relics of the Wild West. The group, 3 men in their 30s, friends since high school, were used to pushing themselves physically. But even they admitted later that the desert felt unusually heavy that day, as if the air carried a warning they couldn't yet hear. By mid-afternoon, their water bottles were half empty, and their pace had slowed. That's when one of them, a man named Carlos, stopped walking and pointed toward the distance. "Do you see that?" he asked. At first, his friends didn't. But then, in the wavering heat, a dark shape emerged. They thought it might be an abandoned fence post, or maybe a weathered Joshua tree stripped bare by the sun. But as they drew closer, the truth revealed itself. It was a man. The scene. He was tied to a tree that shouldn't even exist in that spot. The desert there was mostly open, with scattered shrubs, but this one lonely tree stood alone like a sentinel. His arms were bound tightly around it, rope coiled so deep into his wrists that it had left angry grooves in his skin. His legs were buckled under him, but the ropes forced him upright. The first assumption was grim but straightforward: this was a corpse. The hikers had stumbled onto the remains of some terrible crime. But then, something impossible happened. The man's chest moved. Just barely, so faint it could have been a trick of the eyes, but when one of the hikers pressed a trembling hand against the man's neck, he felt it, a pulse. Weak. Fragile. But undeniably alive. The desert around them suddenly felt suffocating. They had no idea who this man was, how long he had been there, or who had put him there. And worse, they realized that in this kind of heat, time was running out. The mystery begins. They scrambled to free him, sawing desperately at the ropes with a pocket knife. As the last coil came loose, the man collapsed into their arms. His lips were cracked, his skin scorched, his throat so dry that at first, he couldn't speak at all. They poured water between his lips, and he drank like a man who had been wandering the desert for eternity. Finally, after several desperate gulps, he whispered something. But what he said made the hikers freeze in place. Because the man tied to the tree didn't beg for help. He didn't thank them for saving him. Instead, he looked directly at Carlos, his cracked lips trembling, and said, "They'll come back, you shouldn't be here." The hikers exchanged panicked glances. Who was they? And why did he sound more afraid for them than for himself? Tension rises. The hikers faced an impossible choice. They were 2 hours away from their campsite, deep into terrain that barely registered on any map. The man they'd rescued was too weak to walk on his own, and the sun was beginning to tilt toward the horizon. If they stayed, they risked encountering whoever had tied this man here. If they left, they risked leaving him to die. And then, just as the silence pressed in again, one of the hikers noticed something carved into the tree itself. The bark, just above where the man's head had been slumped, bore a series of scratches. At first, they looked random. But when he traced them with his finger, his stomach dropped. It wasn't random at all. The marks formed words. And the words read, "Do not untie." The hikers felt the desert shift around them, as if the air itself had grown heavier. Who would write that? And why? The man they'd just freed was trembling violently now, his eyes darting back and forth like he was waiting for someone, or something, to emerge from the dunes. And in that moment, standing in the middle of the silent sea, with the sun bleeding out behind the mountains and shadows creeping across the sand, the hikers realized something terrifying. Whatever they had just gotten themselves into, it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about a secret someone wanted buried. And that secret had just woken up. The warning in the desert. The aftermath of discovery. The desert had shifted. What once felt like an empty wasteland now pressed down on the hikers like a living thing, suffocating and expectant. Carlos knelt beside the man they had just untied, holding him upright as his body convulsed with tremors. The man's lips were pale, cracked, trembling as he tried to form words. "They'll come back," he rasped, his voice barely audible. His eyes, bloodshot and sunken, darted toward the horizon as if he expected shapes to rise out of the sand at any moment. "You shouldn't have," he coughed violently, the sound raw and wet. "You shouldn't have untied me." The words hit like an electric shock. The three hikers, Carlos, Jason, and Derek, looked at one another in silence. 1,000 questions raced between them, none of them spoken aloud. Who was this man? Who tied him here? Why was he more afraid of being untied than of being left to die? The desert wind stirred, whispering through the scrub brush, carrying with it the smell of something metallic, something wrong. The carved warning. Jason, the tallest of the group and the least patient, moved back to the tree and traced the words carved deep into its bark, "Do not untie." It wasn't graffiti. It wasn't random vandalism. Each letter had been carved with deliberate force, dug deep into the wood. He ran his finger along the grooves, his stomach churning. This wasn't some warning to us," Jason muttered. "This was for whoever found him." Or, Derek said slowly, his voice low, "It was for us. Specifically. Maybe we weren't supposed to do this." The silence that followed was unbearable. The debate. Carlos snapped out of it first. "Listen, we don't have time for this. This man's dying. We need to get him out of here, now." Jason shook his head. "And go where, Carlos?" "We're 6 miles from the trailhead, and another hour's drive from the nearest town. He can't walk, not in this condition. And even if we manage to drag him back, what happens if whoever did this comes looking?" Derek added, "He said they'd come back." They. Not just one person. That sounds like more than we can handle. Carlos's jaw clenched. He looked down at the man, whose eyes were wide and darting, his chest heaving in shallow bursts. He was terrified, not of dying, but of something worse. Carlos leaned close to him. "Who are they?" he whispered. The man's lips moved, but his voice was too faint to hear. Carlos pressed his ear closer. After a long pause, the man exhaled one word. "Hunters." A chill in the heat. The word cut through the suffocating heat like ice water. "Hunters." Jason laughed nervously. "What does that even mean? Like, actual hunters? Out here?" But the man's eyes flicked to him with sudden intensity, as if the word had weight far beyond its ordinary meaning. His lips trembled again, forming another word. "Not animals." The air thickened. Jason's forced laugh died in his throat. Derek whispered, "Then what do they hunt?" The man's eyes closed, tears sliding down his sunburned cheeks. Us. Signs of pursuit. The hikers felt exposed, like ants under a magnifying glass. The desert, so open and unending, suddenly seemed like a cage. Jason's head snapped up as he thought he heard something, the faint crunch of sand, far off in the distance. He scanned the horizon, but nothing moved. Still, his gut screamed they weren't alone. Carlos urged, "We need to go. Now." He grabbed the man under one arm, motioning for Derek to take the other. Jason hesitated, still staring at the horizon, but finally joined them. They began the agonizing trek back toward their camp, dragging the man's weight between them. His body was frail, every step racking him with coughs. But he whispered directions through his pain, murmuring things like, "Not that way," and "Stay low." It was as if he knew the desert better than they did. And then they noticed something else. In the sand, just beyond where they had found him, there were tracks. Not fresh, but not old either. Boot prints. At least 4 different sets, circling the tree like vultures around prey. Jason's voice cracked. He wasn't lying. The camp decision. By the time they reached their small campsite, the sun was almost gone, the horizon bleeding into shades of red and purple. Shadows stretched across the desert floor, long and sinister. They laid the man down under the shade of a tent, forcing more water into his parched lips. He shivered despite the heat, whispering nonsense, snippets of prayers, fragments of warnings. The hikers argued in hushed tones a few feet away. "Jason, we can't stay here. If they come back and find us with him. Carlos, we can't move him tonight. He won't survive it. We wait until sunrise, then we head for the trailhead. Derek, and if they find us before then?" Silence. Carlos finally said, "Then we fight." The words didn't reassure anyone. The man speaks. Later that night, as the stars came out in suffocating numbers, the man stirred again. His voice was raspy, broken, but more coherent than before. "They tied me, to make an example." His eyes flicked between the 3 hikers. "I wasn't the first. I won't be the last." Carlos asked gently, "Who are they?" The man swallowed hard. "They call themselves hunters. But it's not a name, it's what they are. They take people. Not for ransom. Not for revenge. For sport." The hikers felt sick. Jason whispered, "Why you?" The man coughed, his voice trembling. "Wrong place, wrong time. They don't choose based on anything you do. They choose based on where you are. If you're here when they come, you belong to them." The 3 hikers stared at one another, realization dawning like ice in their veins. They had been in the wrong place, at the wrong time. The Watcher. Sometime after midnight, Jason stirred awake. He hadn't meant to fall asleep, but exhaustion had stolen him. He blinked groggily at the desert outside their tent, and froze. There was someone standing out there. A figure, tall and motionless, standing just at the edge of the firelight. Too far to make out details, too close to be mistaken for anything else. Jason's heart slammed in his chest. He whispered sharply, waking Derek and Carlos. They scrambled silently, eyes wide. But when they looked outside again, the figure was gone. Jason swore under his breath. "I saw them. I swear I did." Carlos's face was pale. "Then they know we're here." The man tied to the tree opened his eyes weakly. His voice, though faint, carried an eerie certainty. "They always know." The desert night stretched long, every sound magnified, every shadow threatening. The hikers sat in silence, weapons clutched in their hands, staring at the darkness. They were no longer asking if the hunters would return. They were waiting for when. And in that silence, one thought screamed louder than all the rest. By untying that man, they hadn't just saved his life. They had marked themselves as prey. The game begins. The night that wouldn't end. The desert night is supposed to bring relief. When the blistering sun finally dips below the horizon, the air cools, and the silence grows heavier. But for Carlos, Jason, and Derek, the darkness brought no comfort. They huddled close to their campfire, its glow a fragile bubble of safety in a sea of shadows. The man they had rescued, still too weak to stand, lay on a blanket near the fire. His eyes fluttered open and closed, muttering fragmented warnings, like a fevered dream that none of them wanted to decode. Every snap of dry brush made them flinch. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. Jason's hands wouldn't stop shaking. He kept replaying the moment he had seen the figure at the edge of camp. He knew what he saw. Someone had been there. Watching. Waiting. The silence was so loud, it made Carlos's ears ring. Then Derek whispered the words they were all afraid to say aloud. "They're out there, aren't they?" The man on the blanket stirred, his voice raspy but clear enough to cut through the fire crackle. "They never leave." The first sign. Just before dawn, Jason noticed something odd in the sand near camp. He squinted into the gray light, his stomach tightening. Footprints. They weren't theirs. The pattern was different, heavier boots, deep treads. Whoever had been watching them last night had circled their camp while they slept. And worse, there weren't just one set of prints. There were several. Jason's breath quickened. He followed the trail a few steps out, his heart pounding, until he saw something else half buried in the sand. He knelt, brushed it off, and froze. It was a piece of fabric. Torn, dirty, and soaked with something dark that had dried stiff. Blood. He staggered back, clutching the cloth. It wasn't theirs. It didn't belong to the man they rescued. It belonged to someone else. And the way it was positioned, just outside their camp, it wasn't dropped. It was placed. A message. The growing divide. Panic clawed at the group. Carlos wanted to break camp and move immediately. Jason argued that traveling in daylight made them exposed. Derek suggested hiding until nightfall. The man on the blanket, his voice shaking, whispered, "It doesn't matter. Once they've chosen you, there's no hiding." Jason snapped, his fear boiling into anger. "Then what? What do we do, just sit here and wait to be picked off?" The man's reply chilled them. "You don't fight the hunters. You survive them. If you can." Jason slammed his fist into the sand. "That's not good enough." Carlos leaned in, his face grim. "Then maybe the question isn't what we do. Maybe it's why us. Why now? If they've been out here, why him? Why tie him up? What are they trying to prove?" The man's hollow eyes lifted to meet his. "They want fear. They don't hunt for food. They hunt for the chase." The sound in the distance. By mid-morning, the desert heat returned with brutal force. They packed what they could, dragging the weak man between them, sweat pouring down their faces. The sand seemed endless, stretching out forever. And then, faint at first but growing louder, they heard it. A whistle. Low. Sharp. Deliberate. It carried over the dunes, impossible to tell from which direction. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. It was human. The four of them froze. Jason's voice cracked. "They're toying with us." The whistle repeated. 3 short bursts. Then silence. Derek whispered, That's a signal." The man they carried moaned, covering his ears weakly. "Don't listen, don't answer, just move." But even as he said it, another sound followed. A high-pitched shriek, metal scraping against metal, like a blade drawn across steel. The desert was no longer empty. It was alive with predators. The stalking. For hours, they trudged through the heat, the sound of their labored breathing mixing with phantom noises behind them. A crunch of sand here. A faint laugh there. Each time they spun around, there was nothing. But the evidence mounted. Rocks balanced unnaturally on one another, as if someone had stacked them recently. A set of boot prints that appeared parallel to their own trail, like shadows following them. And then they saw it. On a ridge in the distance, silhouetted against the blazing sun, stood a figure. Motionless. Watching. Jason raised his arm to point, but before he could speak, the figure was gone. Derek's face was pale. "How are they moving that fast?" Carlos whispered, "Because they know this desert better than we ever could." The man between them coughed, his words ragged. "They don't move fast. They move smart. You'll never see the one that takes you." The first attack. It happened suddenly. As they rounded a dune, Jason felt something whistle past his ear, a blur too fast to register. It struck the sand with a dull thud. He spun around and saw it, a long wooden arrow, its crude tip buried inches from where his head had been. "Down!" Carlos shouted. They dropped into the sand, dragging the weak man with them. Jason's heart thundered. "They're shooting at us." But Derek shook his head, pointing at the arrow. "If they wanted you dead, they wouldn't have missed." The realization hit them like a gut punch. It wasn't an attack. It was a warning. A reminder, we could end this any time we want. The man on the blanket gasped through his cracked lips. The chase has begun. The trap. As the sun sank again, exhaustion set in. They found a shallow ravine for shelter, its walls giving some illusion of safety. They collapsed there, their nerves frayed, their minds stretched thin. Carlos kept watch while the others tried to rest. His eyes scanned the horizon, searching for movement. That's when he noticed something strange on the ridge above them. A bundle. He climbed carefully, hands trembling, and retrieved it. The bundle was wrapped in cloth, tied with rough rope. Inside, his stomach dropped. A human hand. Severed at the wrist, the skin leathery from the heat. He gagged, stumbling back, almost dropping it. But what froze him wasn't the hand itself. It was the object clutched in its stiff fingers. A photograph. He pulled it free with shaking hands. It was of them. The 3 hikers, taken earlier that day, trudging through the desert. Their faces blurred by distance, but unmistakable. Carlos staggered back down the ridge, the photo burning in his hand. When he showed it to Jason and Derek, the blood drained from their faces. "They're not just hunting us," Jason whispered. "They're studying us." The man's story. That night, under the suffocating sky, the rescued man spoke again. His voice was stronger now, as if the terror itself fueled him. "They took me 3 days ago. I was hiking alone. They surrounded me before I knew they were there. They tied me to that tree, not to kill me, but to see who would come. They wait. They watch. And when someone tries to help..." He trailed off, his hollow eyes fixed on the 3 hikers. Carlos swallowed hard. "We were the bait." The man nodded weakly. "You were always the prey. You just didn't know it until now." The desert night pressed in again, heavy and watchful. The hikers sat in silence, the severed hand in the photograph between them like cursed relics. Somewhere out there, unseen but never absent, the hunters circled. The game had started. And the rules were simple. Run. Suffer. Fear. Until they decided the hunt was over. The closing circle. The dawn of dread. When the sun rose the next morning, it wasn't relief that washed over the group. It was dread. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, golden and cruel. The man they had rescued lay weak between them, his skin blistered, his eyes hollow but alert. The severed hand in the photograph still sat in the sand where they had left them. No one touched them again. They didn't need to. Their message had already sunk in, the hunters were in control. Carlos scanned the horizon. "We move. Now." His voice was hard, decisive, but his eyes betrayed fear. Jason, however, was losing patience. "Move where, Carlos?" "Every step we take, they're there. Every step, they're laughing at us. You saw the photo. They're not chasing us, they're leading us." Derek's voice cracked. "Then what do we do?" "Just sit here and wait to die." Silence. The man on the ground whispered, "They'll never let you sit. They'll force you to play." The first trap. By mid-morning, they set out again, dragging the weakened man between them. The heat clawed at their throats, every breath dry and raw. Jason was in front when he suddenly stopped. He pointed at the sand ahead. "Look!" There was something half-buried, glinting faintly in the sun. Carlos moved cautiously, brushing away the sand. His heart dropped. It was a knife. An old hunting blade, its handle wrapped in worn leather. Jason snatched it up, clutching it like a lifeline. But the moment he did, Derek shouted, "Wait, don't move." They froze. Derek pointed at the sand around the blade. The earth was disturbed, subtly, deliberately. Carlos's eyes widened. "It's a trap." Jason's hands shook as he lowered the knife carefully back into the sand. He looked around frantically, his chest heaving. They knew we'd grab it. They wanted us to. The man they carried moaned weakly. They plant hope, then punish you for reaching. The circle tightens. As the day dragged on, the signs of the hunter's presence grew bolder. Carved symbols in tree bark. Rocks arranged in unnatural patterns. Fresh boot prints that crisscrossed their path like a net being drawn tighter. At one point, Derek tripped over something half-buried. He bent down, thinking it was another planted object. But when he pulled it free, his stomach lurched. It was a shoe. A hiking boot, caked with dried blood. And inside it, still lodged deep in the heel, was a human foot. He dropped it instantly, gagging, his body trembling. Jason screamed, his voice cracking. "What the hell is this? What do they want from us?" The man on the ground coughed violently, whispering through cracked lips. "They want fear. They want to see you break." The mental collapse. By evening, the group was falling apart. Jason paced back and forth, clutching a rock like a weapon, his eyes wild. "They're everywhere. They're probably watching us right now. You hear me?" He screamed into the desert, his voice hoarse. "Come out. Come out and face us." Silence. Only the wind answered. Carlos grabbed him, hissing through clenched teeth. "You're giving them what they want. They want you to lose it. Don't let them win." Jason shoved him away, tears streaming down his face. "We're already losing. Don't you see? We're dead men walking." Derek sat against a rock, his hands covering his face, his body shaking silently. The rescued man, barely conscious, whispered, "This is what they do. They don't have to touch you to kill you." The shadow in the dunes. That night, exhaustion stole them again, despite their fear. The fire burned low, crackling weakly. Carlos was the first to wake. His throat was dry, his lips cracked, but something had stirred him from his shallow sleep. He turned his head slowly, and his blood froze. On the ridge above them, silhouetted against the pale moonlight, stood three figures. Tall. Still. Watching. He blinked, his heart hammering, but they didn't move. He reached to shake Jason awake, but when he looked back, they were gone. He gasped, his chest tight. Had he imagined it? Then he noticed something new. Just at the edge of their camp, in the sand, a message had been written. 4 words, etched in bold strokes. "One of you next." The sacrifice question. When the others woke, Carlos showed them the message. Jason's hands shook violently. "They're going to take one of us. That's what this means. They're choosing." Derek's voice cracked. "Then what if we give them what they want? What if we..." He stopped, unable to finish. Carlos's face hardened. "Don't say it." But Jason did. "He's slowing us down. If we leave him here, maybe they'll take him instead of us." The man on the ground's eyes opened weakly, staring up at them with quiet resignation. He didn't beg. He didn't plead. He just whispered, "That's what they want. For you to turn on each other." The silence that followed was heavier than the desert heat. The test. Not long after sunrise, they reached a narrow canyon. It was the only path forward, steep rock walls on either side. Carlos didn't like it. It's a choke point. They'll be waiting. But there was no other way. As they entered the canyon, the air grew cooler, the shadows long. The silence was absolute. Halfway through, Jason suddenly stopped. His voice shook. "Look!" On the rock wall ahead, painted in something dark and sticky, was a message. "Choose. Or we choose." And below it, 3 crude drawings. Stick figures. Each marked with an X. Jason turned to Carlos, his voice breaking. "They're forcing us. If we don't pick, they will." Derek whispered, "This isn't hunting. This is torture." The man they carried groaned in despair. "It's both." The canyon walls seemed to close in on them, the weight of the message pressing down like stone. They were no longer simply trying to survive the desert. They were pawns in a game designed to break them, body, mind, and soul. And as the echo of their footsteps bounced off the canyon walls, one thought consumed them all. The hunters weren't asking for survival. They were demanding sacrifice. The first loss. The canyon echo. The hikers stood frozen in the canyon, staring at the message scrawled in dried, dark streaks on the wall. "Choose. Or we choose." The stick figures beneath it looked childish, crude. But the intent was clear. If they didn't turn on each other, the hunters would do it for them. Jason's voice cracked first. We can't ignore this. They're telling us what's next." Carlos shook his head violently. "No. We don't play their game." Derek's face was pale, his lips trembling. "But what if not playing is the game? What if by not choosing, we're choosing all of us to die?" The rescued man, still too weak to walk, rasped from where he lay slumped against the canyon wall. "This is what they do. They'll fracture you. They want you to destroy yourselves, so they don't have to." The canyon wind whistled like a mocking laugh. Fracture in the group. As they pressed forward, the air between them grew poisonous. Jason walked several paces ahead, muttering to himself, gripping the crude knife he had fashioned from a sharp rock. His eyes darted constantly, not just to the ridges above but to his own friends. Derek kept glancing at the man they carried, resentment etched into his face. Every step with the extra weight tore at his strength. "He's dead weight. If we don't leave him, none of us make it out alive." Carlos snapped, his voice raw. "We don't leave people behind. Not him. Not anyone." Jason laughed bitterly. "Is that what you tell yourself, Carlos? Because the way I see it, they've already told us what comes next. One of us isn't leaving this canyon." The first snare. Not long after, Derek stumbled. He cried out as something snapped tight around his ankle, yanking him into the air. He screamed as he was hoisted upside down, dangling 10 feet above the ground. His backpack spilled open, scattering supplies across the sand. "Help me," he cried, thrashing wildly. Carlos and Jason rushed forward, grabbing at his leg, trying to undo the crude rope snare. The man on the ground moaned in panic, his eyes darting at the canyon ridges. "Quick!" Carlos shouted. "Before." But then they heard it. Laughter. Not loud. Not wild. But soft. Controlled. Echoing from the canyon walls. Jason's eyes shot upward, scanning desperately. "They're watching us." The laughter stopped. Silence. And then, a single arrow thudded into the sand just inches from Derek's head. His scream tore through the canyon. "Hurry!" Carlos slashed at the rope with Jason's sharp rock until it finally snapped, sending Derek crashing to the ground. They dragged him away, their hearts pounding. The arrow remained in the sand, its shaft quivering as if alive. The breaking point. That night, they found a shallow cave to rest in. The firelight danced against the stone, casting uneasy shadows. Derek sat apart, holding his bruised ankle, glaring at the rescued man. If it wasn't for him, they wouldn't even be hunting us. Carlos snapped. Don't you dare blame him. We chose to untie him. Jason's voice rose, sharp and accusing. No, you chose to untie him. You were the one who pushed us. And now look where we are. Carlos's jaw clenched. What was I supposed to do, let him die? Yes. Jason exploded, tears cutting through the dirt on his face. Maybe then we'd still have a chance. The cave fell silent. The rescued man turned his face toward the wall, tears slipping down his cracked skin. Derek whispered bitterly, maybe it's not too late to fix it. The hunter's message. At dawn, Carlos stepped outside the cave to gather what little water he could from the canteens. But when he returned, his stomach dropped. On the wall outside the cave, drawn in black ash, was another message. Tonight. Carlos's breath quickened. He ran back inside, shaking the others awake. They're telling us, they're coming tonight. Jason's face crumpled. Then it's us or him. He pointed at the rescued man. Carlos shoved him back. No. We're not doing this. But Derek stood, his face pale but firm. Then they'll take one of us instead. The silence that followed was unbearable. The vote. By afternoon, the argument boiled over. Exhaustion, hunger, fear, it all came to a head. Jason demanded they leave the man. Derek reluctantly agreed. Carlos refused. They turned on him, shouting, fists clenched. The rescued man tried to speak, his voice trembling. Don't let them turn you against each other. But it was too late. Jason lunged at Carlos, shoving him hard. You're going to get us all killed. The two men grappled in the sand, their fists colliding, grunts echoing off the canyon walls. Derek tried to pull them apart, but the chaos was complete. And above them, from the ridges, another sound rose. A whistle. Sharp. Deliberate. Mocking. They froze instantly, their fight forgotten. The hunters had been watching. And now, the whistle was joined by another. And another. 3 whistles. 3 hunters. The canyon echoed with their laughter. The first claim. Night fell like a curtain, heavy and oppressive. The group sat in silence, their small fire barely a flicker. Every shadow seemed alive. Every breath sounded too loud. Then, a rustle. Derek's head snapped up. Did you hear that? Before anyone could answer, something burst from the shadows. A figure, fast and silent, tackled Derek to the ground. He screamed, thrashing wildly, but the figure's strength was inhuman. Carlos and Jason leapt forward, but 2 more figures emerged, tall and masked, their movements precise. One drew a crude blade, holding it at Jason's chest. The other pinned Carlos effortlessly. The hunters. For the first time, the hikers saw them up close. Their faces were hidden behind bone-white masks, their bodies wrapped in desert-worn clothing. Their eyes gleamed from the shadows of the masks, cold, emotionless. Derek's screams pierced the night as they dragged him into the darkness. His fingers clawed at the sand, leaving desperate trails behind him. Help me! Please! Carlos fought against the grip holding him, his voice raw. No! Let him go! Jason sobbed uncontrollably, frozen in terror. And then, silence. The hunters were gone. So was Derek. The aftermath. Carlos collapsed to his knees, his chest heaving, his fists pounding the ground. Jason curled into himself, rocking back and forth, whispering Derek's name. The rescued man stared into the fire, his hollow eyes shining with tears. Now you know, he whispered. This is how it begins. Carlos looked at him, his voice breaking. What do you mean, begins? They just took him. He's gone. The man's lips trembled. No, he's not gone. He swallowed hard, his voice shaking. They don't kill quickly. They keep him alive, so you can hear what happens next. As if on cue, from somewhere deep in the canyon, a scream ripped through the night. It was Derek's voice. And it wasn't stopping. The scream echoed long into the darkness, twisting into something unrecognizable, part human, part animal, all agony. Carlos buried his face in his hands, tears hot against his cheeks. Jason clutched his ears, rocking violently, trying to block out the sound. And the rescued man whispered the words that would haunt them forever. The hunters have taken their first claim. The game doesn't end until they've taken them all. The fire sputtered, throwing shadows across the canyon walls, and the scream carried on, until it felt like the desert itself was alive with Derek's pain. The desert of screams. The echo of pain. The fire had burned down to embers, but no one slept. Derek's screams carried across the desert, faint but constant. Sometimes a sharp cry. Sometimes a guttural wail. Sometimes a choked silence followed by a fresh eruption of agony. Jason sat curled against the cave wall, his fingernails digging into his scalp. It's him, it's still him, his voice was thin, trembling. They're keeping him alive. Carlos clenched his fists, tears streaking down his dirt-stained cheeks. They're doing this on purpose. They want us to hear him. They want us to break. The rescued man sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the cave. His voice was hoarse. They won't stop. They'll use him until you stop seeing him as Derek. Until he's just another sound in the desert. Jason snapped, his voice rising in panic. Shut up. Don't say that. That's Derek. He's still out there. The man's gaze fell. Yes. But not for long. Fractures deepened. By morning, Jason was inconsolable. He paced in circles, muttering to himself, refusing to eat or drink. We should have chosen. We should have done what they asked. Maybe then he'd still. Carlos grabbed him by the shoulders, shaking him. Stop it. This isn't your fault. It's theirs. Jason's eyes widened, wild and bloodshot. No, Carlos. It is our fault. They told us to choose. And now they're choosing for us. The rescued man whispered, that's how it always goes. Carlos turned on him sharply. You keep saying that. How do you know so much about them? The man's lips trembled, but he didn't answer. He only lowered his head, shame written across his face. Jason's voice broke the silence, sharp and venomous. You knew. You knew this would happen, didn't you? That's why they tied you up. You're not a victim, you're part of this. The man's eyes welled with tears. No, I was like you. I was taken. I just survived long enough to become their warning. The hunter's reminder. That night, as they trudged through the canyon trying to find an exit, they found a grisly marker. Pinned to the rock wall with a sharpened wooden spike was Derek's shirt. Torn, bloodied, but unmistakable. Scrawled across the fabric in what looked like blackened ash were 2 words. Still alive. Jason collapsed to his knees, his voice breaking into sobs. Carlos pulled him close, his own hands shaking. From somewhere distant, Derek's scream cut through the night again. But this time, it wasn't just pain. It was begging. Help me. Please. Jason. Carlos. The sound rattled through the canyon, bouncing from wall to wall until it felt like his voice was coming from every direction. Jason clawed at his ears, his screams mixing with Derek's. I can't take it anymore. Carlos hugged him tightly, tears streaming down his face. Don't listen. It's not him anymore. It's not Derek, it's them. But in his heart, Carlos knew it was Derek. And that was worse. The desert plays tricks. Exhaustion and terror twisted their minds. By the 3rd day without rest, hallucinations began. Jason swore he saw Derek walking ahead of them, barefoot, his body swaying like a puppet. When Carlos blinked, there was nothing but empty sand. Carlos heard his mother's voice in the wind, calling his name. When he spun around, there was only Jason, trembling violently. The rescued man confessed, in a broken whisper, that this was part of the hunter's game. They drugged the water sources. They make you see things. It's to weaken you before the end. Carlos grabbed him by the collar, fury in his eyes. Why didn't you tell us sooner? The man's lips quivered. Because it doesn't matter. There's no way out. Once you're chosen, you're theirs. The mockery. The next morning, they awoke to a fresh horror. Right outside their makeshift camp, carved into the sand with perfect precision, was a circle. Inside it were 3 stick figures, 2 standing, 1 lying down. Above the circle was a single word, written in stone. Next. Jason's scream was raw, animalistic. He kicked the figures, scattering sand everywhere. No! I'm not next. Carlos dragged him back, holding him tightly. Jason, listen to me, we stick together, we don't give them what they want. But Jason shook his head violently, his voice breaking. Don't you get it? They already decided. They're just playing with us. Jason's breaking point. By midday, Jason snapped completely. He stood up, clutching the sharp rock blade in his hand, his chest heaving. I'm not waiting to be taken. I'm not listening to Derek's screams anymore. If someone has to go, it's him. He pointed the blade at the rescued man. Carlos stepped between them instantly. Jason, no. Put it down. Jason's voice cracked, tears streaming down his face. Carlos, open your eyes. He's been lying since we found him. He knows them. He knows everything. If we give them what they want, maybe they'll let us live. The rescued man fell to his knees, his hands trembling. Please, don't. I'm not one of them. Carlos shouted, his voice filled with desperation. Jason, if you do this, they win. Don't let them turn us against each other. Jason's hand shook violently, the blade hovering inches from the man's chest. His face twisted in anguish, torn between fear and loyalty. Suddenly, a sound cut through the air. Not Derek's scream. Not the wind. A single, sharp whistle. Jason froze. His eyes widened. And then, an arrow slammed into the ground between his feet. The message was clear. They were watching. Always watching. The collapse. Jason dropped the blade, sobbing uncontrollably. Carlos pulled him close, rocking him like a child. It's okay, they want us to do this. Don't give them what they want. The rescued man whispered, his voice hollow. It doesn't matter. They'll take him soon anyway. And then you. Carlos snapped at him, his voice shaking with rage. Stop saying that. Stop talking like it's already over. But even as he said it, Derek's voice echoed across the desert once more, weaker now, barely recognizable. Help, me. Jason's sobs turned into whimpers. Carlos shut his eyes tight, tears streaming down. The man stared at the sand, silent. And above them, on the canyon ridge, a figure appeared, just for a moment. Tall. Masked. Watching. And then gone. The desert had grown silent again, but it wasn't peace. It was the silence of a predator, patient and cruel. Carlos knew, deep in his bones, that they were running out of time. Jason was slipping into madness. Derek was still alive, but only barely, his voice a ghost in the night. The rescued man seemed to know far more than he admitted. And the hunters? They were tightening the noose. Carlos whispered to himself, barely audible, as he stared into the endless dark. Please, someone, anyone, let us out of here. But no answer came. Only the desert. Only the silence. And only the next scream, closer this time. Much closer. The last game. The final descent. Carlos barely recognized Jason anymore. His friend's eyes were sunken, his skin cracked from dehydration, his body trembling with exhaustion and fear. But it wasn't just physical, Jason's mind was fracturing. He muttered Derek's name constantly, rocking as they walked, sometimes breaking into laughter, sometimes into sobs. The rescued man limped behind them, his face ghostly pale. He hadn't spoken much since Jason nearly killed him, but the few words he muttered haunted Carlos. They always finish what they start. Carlos gritted his teeth. He had to keep them moving, had to believe there was a way out. We'll find an exit. A road. Something. But even as he said it, Derek's voice echoed again, fainter now, more broken. Jazz, on. Carlos. Jason froze. Tears spilled down his face. He's still calling us. Carlos pulled him forward. No. It's not him anymore. It's them. But in his heart, he wasn't sure. The trail of ash. By midday, they stumbled into a clearing between canyon walls. In the center, a circle of black ash. Inside the circle lay Derek. Or what was left of him. His body was torn, bound by ropes, his face unrecognizable. But his chest rose and fell, faintly. He was alive. Barely. Jason screamed, sprinting forward. Derek! Carlos grabbed him, yanking him back. No! It's a trap. From the ridges above, the laughter began again. Slow. Cruel. Mocking. Jason clawed at Carlos, his voice breaking. Let me go! That's my best friend. Carlos held him tighter, shaking his head violently. He's gone, Jason. That's not Derek anymore. But Derek's head turned, ever so slightly. His lips moved. Kill me. The choice. Jason fell to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably. No, no, no. Carlos's stomach turned. He knew exactly what the hunters wanted. This was the choice. The one they had warned them about from the beginning. Choose. Or we choose. Jason's hand trembled toward the sharp stone blade at his waist. I can't do this. Carlos grabbed his wrist. Jason, listen to me. If you do this, they win. They'll make you into one of them. The rescued man whispered hoarsely from behind. He's right. That's how they grow. Every time someone kills for them, they become one of the hunters. Jason's eyes widened, his face pale with horror. He dropped the blade, his sobs echoing through the canyon. From above, the whistles began again. 1. Then 2. Then 3. The hunters were watching. Waiting. The final night. They fled the clearing, but Derek's faint cries followed them, carried by the wind. Carlos forced Jason onward, half dragging him through the sand, the rescued man stumbling behind. That night, they huddled in the shadow of a canyon wall, no fire, no words. Jason whispered into the dark, I can't take it anymore. I can't leave him like that. Carlos grabbed his hand, tears in his eyes. If you go back, they'll take you too. Jason's gaze was distant, hollow. Maybe that's better. Carlos shook him, desperation clawing his throat. No. Jason, please. I need you. You're all I have left. Jason looked at him for a long moment, his lip trembling. Finally, he nodded. But Carlos saw the truth in his eyes. Jason was already gone. Jason's sacrifice. At dawn, Carlos woke to silence. Jason was gone. Panic surged through him. He stumbled to his feet, searching the sand for tracks. They led back toward the clearing. No, 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 no! Carlos ran, dragging the rescued man behind him. His heart pounded with every step. When they reached the clearing, Jason was kneeling beside Derek's broken body, cradling him like a child. Carlos froze, his chest heaving. Jason, no! Jason looked up, tears streaming down his face. His hand gripped the blade. Derek's voice was barely a whisper. Please! Jason sobbed, kissed Derek's forehead, and drove the blade into his chest. Derek's body jerked once, then fell still. From the ridges, the whistles erupted in unison, shrill and triumphant. Jason collapsed over Derek, screaming in anguish. Carlos fell to his knees, his heart shattering. the rescued man whispered, his voice trembling. It's done. They've chosen him. Becoming. The hunters emerged from the ridges, stepping into the clearing for the first time. Tall. Masked. Their bone-white faces gleaming in the morning sun. Carlos held Jason, shielding him instinctively, but the hunters ignored him. Their eyes were on Jason. Jason trembled, his body convulsing. He looked up, his face pale, his eyes hollow. They're inside me, he whispered. Carlos shook him violently. Fight it, Jason. Don't let them take you. But Jason's lips curled into something unnatural. His eyes, once full of terror, now gleamed with a cold, lifeless light. The hunters surrounded him, their laughter echoing through the canyon. One of them extended a hand. And Jason took it. The end of hope. Carlos screamed, lunging forward, but the rescued man held him back. No! If you interfere, they'll take you too. Carlos fought against him, tears streaming down his face. That's my best friend. I can't lose him too. But it was too late. Jason stood now, tall and silent among them. His face was blank, his body rigid. The hunters turned, melting into the canyon shadows with Jason at their side. Carlos fell to the ground, his sobs shaking his body. The rescued man whispered, "It's over. He's one of them now." The final whisper. The desert grew silent again. No laughter. No whistles. No screams. Carlos lay in the sand, broken. His best friend was gone. Derek was dead. The rescued man was barely alive. And then, from somewhere behind him, a voice. Jason's voice. Soft. Calm. Carlos. Carlos froze, his blood running cold. Slowly, he turned. There, standing in the shadows of the canyon, was Jason. His mask gleamed bone-white, his eyes empty. He raised a hand. Not in a wave. Not in farewell. In a gesture Carlos knew all too well. The signal to be silent. And then he vanished into the darkness. Carlos collapsed, his cries swallowed by the desert. The rescued man whispered the truth he had never dared to speak. No one escapes. Not really. You either die in the desert, or you join them. And as the sun rose over the endless wasteland, Carlos realized the cruelest part of the hunter's game. They didn't just take lives. They took people. And turned them into monsters. That's the finale. It ends with a gut punch, leaves the mystery unresolved. Who are the hunters? How long has this gone on, but keeps the emotional devastation front and center? Remember to subscribe to this channel for my chilling true crime stories.